Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The men's voices filled the equipment room like heavy smoke, laughter, curses, inside jokes only they seemed to understand. 8 Navy SEALs, each built like a monument, stripped their rifles down to bolts and springs with the effortless rhythm of men who had done this thousands of times. Their hands moved with precision, their chatter with confidence. And at the far end of the room, half in shadow, sat Sergeant. She wasn't laughing, she wasn't talking, she wasn't invited in. The M24 sniper rifle lay across her lap, long and its battered stock etched with scratches that told stories none of these men had ever asked about. She worked in silence, running a cleaning rod through the barrel, each motion slow, deliberate. The rifle was old compared to the sleek carbines the SEALs carried, but touched it as if it were alive. "Hey, radio girl," Martinez called, his thick forearms glistening with sweat, a grin splitting his square face. "You sure you can even lift that thing? Looks like it weighs more than you do." The other men chuckled, not cruelly, not kindly, just the way men laughed when they didn't know what else to do with someone who didn't fit their circle. Didn't answer, she rarely did. Words were wasted when action would prove more. Inside, though, the words stung. She'd been called radio girl since her first deployment, the quiet comms specialist who carried wires, batteries, and a rifle too big for her frame. To them, she was support staff with combat boots. To her, she was something else entirely, though she had never said it out loud. The M24 hadn't been issued to her. It had Ben's. Her brother's rifle. Every time she touched it, she felt the desert heat of New Mexico on her skin again, the pine needles crunching beneath their boots as lined up targets on old beer cans in the woods. He taught her how to breathe, how to steady her pulse, how to let the world shrink until all that remained was the crosshair and the target. He used to whisper, "Patience. One shot, one soul." Hadn't come home from. An enemy bullet had silenced him, but his rifle had found its way back to her hands. Now it was her inheritance, her anchor. She wiped the scope with a cloth, eyes steady. The SEALs saw a calm tech pretending to play sniper, but this was all that remained of her brother. A tool, yes, but also a promise. The team leader's voice snapped through the room, cold and clipped. "Briefing, 1900 hours." The men snapped to attention, gathering around the tactical map. The smell of gun oil still hung heavy. "Border town, 40 clicks north," the officer said. "Suspected weapons cache, possible high-value target, recon confirm, extract if necessary." Stood just behind them, silent. When the leader's finger landed on the map, he didn't even glance at her. "Your tail in Charlie. Maintain comms. Call support if we need it. Copy." "Yes, sir." No mention of the rifle. No recognition of the weight she carried. She was invisible. She was used to it. Her brother had once told her the best snipers were like shadows, seen only when they chose to be. But even shadows carried doubt. That night, as the desert sky swallowed the compound in darkness, the SEALs checked their gear one last time. Night vision goggles, body armor, ammunition, medical supplies, 40 pounds on each back. 40 pounds that might mean the difference between living and returning in a box. His own pack was heavier, radio gear, backup batteries, medical kits, and his rifle slung across her shoulder like a cross. She tightened the straps, felt the weight settle against her small frame, and told herself again what she always whispered before stepping out the gate. Don't think about proving them wrong. Just think about surviving. The formation slipped into the night. 8 shadows moved like predators, trailed 20 meters behind, boots finding soft purchase on sand and scattered stone. Above them, the desert sky glittered with stars, cold and silent, as if mocking the noise of war brewing below. Hours passed. The town rose like a skeleton from the earth, burned-out buildings, hollow stalls where vendors once sold spices and cloth, glass crunching underfoot where windows had shattered long ago. The place smelled of dust and memory, A market square where life had once thrived but now held only ghosts. His headset crackled with check-ins. Overwatch in position, north clear. South movement, probably cats. But her skin prickled. Too quiet. No dogs, no generators. No voices of families trying to live through war, just silence, heavy, waiting. She keyed her radio. Team lead, something's off, feels wrong. Copy Shadow 24, continue mission. She pressed her lips together. He didn't hear what she felt. Then came the first crack. The round slammed into concrete inches from Johnson's skull, spraying him with dust. His shout tore the night open. Contact north. And the world erupted. Muzzle flashes lit rooftops and alleys like sudden stars. Red tracer fire carving the air, machine guns rattling with savage rhythm. Dropped behind a collapsed wall as rounds snapped overhead, the M24 clumsy against her pack. Her heart slammed, not from fear alone but from the knowledge this wasn't random. This was orchestrated. 91 fighters, at least. Positions on 3 sides. Fields of fire overlapping like a steel net. A trap. She could hear the SEALs shouting, returning disciplined bursts, their movements drilled and mechanical. But even she could see the truth. Numbers didn't lie. 8 men caught in a box, outnumbered 11 to 1. A rocket screamed across the square, blasting a pillar into fire and dust. Martinez cursed, dragging a wounded man behind cover. The heavy pounding of a DK machine gun joined the cacophony, chewing concrete as though it were paper. Pressed herself into the rubble. She stole a glance through her scope, and there he was. The commander. Second-floor balcony, radio in hand, directing the storm. Every movement of the enemy fighters traced back to him, his gestures, his voice, his presence. Kill him and maybe the storm would break. Leave him and the team was finished. The team leader's voice hissed in her ear. Hold position, do not expose. The safe order, the logical one. The order that meant 8 men would die slowly, predictably. Her finger curled around the trigger. His voice drifted back to her, soft as desert wind. Sometimes the right shot changes everything. Her chest tightened. If she pulled, she would reveal herself. If she missed, she'd die. But if she did. Exhaled, slow, deliberate. Her heart slowed too, settling into the rhythm had drilled into her bones. The chaos around her muted, fading into background noise. Her world narrowed until all that remained was the crosshair and that man's chest, illuminated by firelight. Range 620 meters. Wind, light, temperature, cool, all of it calculated in a heartbeat. The stock pressed against her cheek, the etched words brushing her skin like a prayer. One shot, one soul. And then she pulled. The M24 thundered. Time fractured. The recoil pushed against her shoulder, the bullet streaking out faster than thought, faster than hope. She tracked it in her mind, every fraction of a second stretching into eternity. The commander spun, chest caved, radio flying from his hand. His body crumpled against the railing, dead before he hit the floor. And the night stopped. For 3 breaths silence reigned. Then the enemy line fractured. 91 fighters, suddenly leaderless, broke like glass. Some fired wildly, some froze, some ran. Chambered the next round, already hunting, already calculating. In the rubble below, the SEALs lifted their heads. Who the hell took that shot? The team leader whispered, awe and disbelief laced together. But didn't answer. Her brother had told her once, snipers don't explain, they just change the story. What happens after a single bullet changes everything. For a heartbeat, the marketplace was silent. The gunfire, the explosions, the chaos, it all seemed to freeze as though the desert itself had stopped breathing. The commander's body slumped against the railing above, lifeless, and his radio shattered on the ground below. Then the fracture came. 91 fighters who had been a single organism, coordinated and lethal, suddenly became 91 frightened men. Their fire scattered, erratic, no longer guided by the steady voice in their earpieces. Some clung to their positions, firing blindly into the night. Others bolted, breaking cover in desperate attempts to flee. A few stood paralyzed, like deer caught in the sweep of headlights. Saw it all through the glass of her scope. Her world narrowed, measured. The chaos that crushed others only sharpened her. She slid the bolt. The next round chambered with a metallic snap that sounded like inevitability. Her eye tracked the technical vehicle, its heavy decay still churning the air with rounds that ripped concrete to dust. The gunner stood firm, oblivious to his commander's fall, locked into his weapon's rhythm. His crosshairs kissed the space beneath his arm, breath, patience, one pull. The second shot cracked the night. The gunner's body folded, slumping across the weapon. The heavy machine gun stuttered into silence. The driver panicked. The engine roared, the vehicle jolting backward in a desperate retreat. But with no gunner, it was just another steel coffin waiting to be abandoned. "Jesus Christ," Martinez whispered over comms, his voice cracked, reverent, stunned. The SEALs, pinned moments ago, now began to move. Fire and maneuver, bounding from cover to cover, their training clicking back into place as the balance tipped. One half laid down suppressive bursts while the other shifted positions, pushing the enemy back. Was already scanning, already calculating. She found a rooftop cache stacked with ammunition crates, men huddled around it, waiting to feed the fight. She tightened the scope, felt her finger ease into the trigger. His voice whispered again, steady as stone. Sometimes the hardest shots are just practice for the impossible ones. The M24 roared a third time. The crate erupted, sparks and flame ripping across the rooftop. The explosion swallowed the men crouched there, and a ripple of secondary blasts rolled outward. Gunfire faltered. The SEAL team advanced. The hunters had become the hunted. Stayed prone, invisible but present, ghost-like. The SEALs didn't know where her shots were coming from, but they knew something else with absolute certainty. Someone was out there watching over them. She worked the bolt again, smooth, mechanical, calm. A body fell in her scope, then another. She didn't celebrate, didn't smile, didn't flinch. She was only doing what had taught her: breathe, wait, decide, and end the chaos one bullet at a time. But inside was not calm. Her pulse trembled. Her throat was dry as sand. For all her steady aim, for all her patience, she knew the truth. Each shot was a revelation, each shot an announcement. With every trigger pull, she was daring the enemy to find her. And yet she pulled again, because not pulling would mean watching 8 men die. They didn't believe in her when the night began. They hadn't asked for her rifle, hadn't wanted her shadow trailing them, but they needed her now, desperately. The firefight stretched on, but the tone had shifted. The enemy's precision had melted into chaos. Fighters fired wildly, shouting in broken commands that went unheard. Some threw their weapons aside and ran into the alleys. Others crouched low, paralyzed without orders. Shifted her scope to a rooftop where 3 figures clustered. One aimed, one reloaded, one froze mid-motion, eyes darting toward the balcony where their commander had fallen. She didn't pull the trigger right away. She just watched. For a moment she saw not enemies, just men, young, afraid, trying to decide whether to fight or flee. Her finger trembled. She thought of the last time she saw him, teasing her about her stance, about her size, about her seriousness with a rifle that seemed bigger than her. She thought of his silence now, 3 years gone. She breathed once more and the tremble faded. Not enemies, not men, just targets, just part of the chaos she had been tasked to end. She fired, one crumpled, the others ran. Below, the SEALs moved like wolves, their discipline reawakened. They pressed through alleys, clearing positions one by one, their voices short, sharp, confident again. The panic in them was gone, replaced by something else, something born of survival when death should have been certain. Remained above, unseen, her shots carving the edges of the battle, turning the impossible into the inevitable. It wasn't firepower that saved them. It wasn't numbers. It wasn't even tactics in the sense. It was one woman, one rifle, and one decision made in the rubble that if she was going to die tonight, she would die proving that shadows matter. Minutes stretched into hours, or maybe it was only seconds. In war, time bent strangely. And then silence. The echoes of fire faded. The crackle of burning vehicles lingered. The moans of wounded men rose like ghosts in the smoke. 8 Navy SEALs stood among the wreckage, dust and blood streaking their faces, their hands still tight on weapons they no longer needed to fire. They should have been dead. By every tactical measure, they should not have survived the first 30 seconds of that ambush. But they had. One by one, their eyes lifted toward the balcony, toward the shadow who descended slowly with the M24 still cradled across her chest. Stepped into the square, quiet, unassuming, her rifle lowered but her eyes unreadable. She didn't smile. She didn't expect thanks. The team leader's voice cracked softly, reverent in its understatement. Nice shooting. Just 3 words, nothing more, but in them lay the shift of an entire universe. Nodded once, just doing my job, sir. But everyone there knew the truth. Her job description was comms technician, nothing more. It didn't say guardian angel with a rifle. It didn't say sniper who saved 8 lives with 1 bullet. It didn't say sister carrying the ghost of her brother every time she steadied her aim. Martinez's eyes lingered on the balcony where the enemy commander had fallen, then back on, shaking his head slowly. 620 meters in the dark, under fire. That's not luck, that's professional. Didn't answer. She just began her ritual, rifle safe, chamber cleared, scope covered. Routine in the face of chaos. Quiet competence while others marveled. Because for her, survival wasn't a miracle. It was the result of patience, practice, and one truth had drilled into her soul. The hardest part of courage is staying steady when everyone else has broken. And tonight, steadiness had turned the tide. How do you explain survival when you know you weren't supposed to live? The night had burned itself out. The marketplace was nothing but ruins and echoes, flames flickering in oil-black smoke, steel twisted into strange shapes, silence broken only by the low groans of wounded men left behind by the fleeing fighters. The air still vibrated with the memory of gunfire, but the guns themselves were quiet now. 8 Navy SEALs moved through the wreckage, faces blackened with soot, eyes hollow but alive. They looked at each other in disbelief, like men standing at their own funerals, still waiting for someone to close the coffin. Martinez ripped off his helmet, his hair matted with sweat and dust. He exhaled like a man drowning who had just found air. Jesus Christ, he whispered, how are we still breathing? Didn't answer. She was checking her rifle, running through the ritual motions of clearing the chamber, locking the bolt, protecting the scope. Her hands were steady, though her heart inside was a storm. Because she knew, they all knew. By every book, every manual, every lesson in combat history, they should have been dead. Outnumbered 11-1, ambushed from 3 sides, a heavy machine gun chewing the night into ribbons. No cover, no retreat, no chance. Except for one decision. A single shot that shattered the enemy's spine. Now the men who once laughed at her sat in silence, staring, caught between awe and confusion. They didn't rush her, didn't clap her on the back, didn't shout praise like soldiers in movies. They simply watched. The team leader's voice finally broke the silence, low and level but carrying a tremor he couldn't hide. Johnson, status. Alive, Johnson croaked. His shoulder was slick with blood, shrapnel tearing through muscle, but he grinned with disbelief. Somehow. Williams. Present, another voice rasped, coughing through dust. Can't believe we made it out of that one. One by one, 8 voices answered. 8 men alive in a square that had been designed to become their grave. The leader nodded once, as if the ritual itself proved they still belonged to the living. Then his eyes slid back to. She stood apart, rifle cradled, her compact frame small against the burning ruins. The glow of fire licked across her cheekbones, and her eyes were unreadable. For the first time, they weren't looking at a radio girl. They were looking at the person who had broken 91 enemies with 3 shots. "Nice shooting," the leader said again. The words were soft, almost reluctant, but they carried weight, respect that hadn't existed an hour before. Only nodded, brushing dust from the M24's battered stock. "Just doing my job, sir." Inside, though, her stomach twisted. Her job, that word again. Communications technician, additional duties as needed, not sniper, not warrior, not the thing she had just proven herself to be. She thought of the way his blood had soaked into the sand, of the letter she'd received after, the one she still carried folded in her rucksack, the words smudged from the tears she'd never admitted shedding. "Don't let them tell you what you can or can't do, Saf. You already know who you are." And yet here she was, alive, respected maybe, but also exposed, no longer invisible. The extraction came slow. Hours passed before the night sky trembled with the chop of rotor blades. The SEALs gathered what little gear hadn't been shredded, lifted their wounded, and signaled the bird in. Moved with them, quiet as always, but now they watched her differently, curious, careful, as though seeing her for the first time. On the flight back, no one spoke. They sat strapped into canvas seats, faces ghost pale beneath dirt and blood. The helicopter rattled and groaned, but all could hear was the echo of her shots replaying in her head. Each crack of the rifle had saved a life. Each crack of the rifle had also taken one. She closed her eyes and his voice returned. "One shot, one soul." Her stomach clenched. She whispered back so no one else could hear. "How many souls tonight? How many notches should I carve?" The rifle rested across her knees. Heavy, always heavy. When they landed, dawn was bleeding across the horizon. The base was quiet, only the occasional hum of generators breaking the silence. The SEALs unloaded in a haze, moving like sleepwalkers into the debriefing room. Followed last, her pack digging into her shoulders, the M24 slung against her back. Inside, the medic patched wounds, officers prepared paperwork, and the team collapsed into chairs with the exhaustion of men who had stared into death and blinked back. The smell of antiseptic mixed with sweat and cordite, creating a scent every soldier knew too well. Captain Intelligence Officer skimmed the preliminary report, his eyebrows lifted as he read aloud. 91 confirmed enemy fighters, coordinated ambush, prepared positions, crew-served weapons. By every tactical assessment, you shouldn't have survived the first 30 seconds. No one spoke. They all just listened to the weight of that truth. His eyes narrowed. So what changed? Martinez leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes still wide as if the fire was burning behind them. "One shot changed everything," he said. "Their command structure collapsed. They stopped fighting as a unit. Suddenly we weren't against 91. We were against scattered men with rifles. That shot gave us air." "Scan the room. Who took it?" All eyes turned toward. She sat in the corner, quietly cleaning the M24 with methodical precision, the same way she always did. She didn't even look up when she spoke. "I had the angle. Someone had to do it." Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact, professional, but that tone only deepened the silence that followed. Because everyone understood. This hadn't been desperation or luck. This had been calculation, training, precision. Shook his head slowly, admiration etched into the lines of his face. 620 meters, moving target under fire, at night. That's master sniper level shooting. Didn't answer. She just ran another patch through the rifle's barrel, the steel whispering clean under her hand. "My brother taught me well," she said softly. The room was silent again, not the silence of doubt this time, the silence of respect. And outside, as dawn rose over the desert, whispers spread through the base like wildfire. By breakfast, Soldiers in the mess hall were already talking about the comms technician who had broken an ambush with a single bullet. By lunch, the story had already grown into legend. The woman who saved a SEAL team from 91 fighters didn't like the attention. She didn't want it. She sat alone with her rifle, just as she always had. She didn't join the chatter, didn't correct the exaggerations, didn't smile when the men nodded at her with newfound respect. Because she knew the truth. She wasn't a legend. She was a shadow, a sister carrying her brother's ghost, a sniper who spoke only when she pulled the trigger. And as much as the men around her wanted to believe she had saved them, she carried another thought alone. She hadn't saved them. She'd only delayed the inevitable, because in war there was always another ambush, another mission, another impossible night waiting in the dark. And the weight of the M24 on her back reminded her she would be called again. Why do soldiers trust someone only after death has brushed so close? The forward operating base was never truly quiet, but in the days after the ambush, notice the difference. Conversations shifted when she walked into a room. Eyes lingered on the battered M24 strapped across her back. Soldiers who had never once asked her anything suddenly stopped her in hallways, curious, respectful. 620 meters right, a young Marine whispered one morning as if he just spotted a celebrity. Under fire at night. Didn't look up from the tray of food she was sliding onto the counter. I had the angle, she said simply. She carried her oatmeal back to the far table where she always sat, alone. But she felt the stares, heard the murmurs. By breakfast she was rumor, by lunch she was legend. The SEALs themselves changed more quietly. No grand gestures, no speeches, but small things. Martinez no longer called her radio girl. He still teased, but there was a softness to it now, like he was letting her into the circle instead of pushing her out. You shuffle cards as good as you shoot, he asked one evening, sliding a deck across the table. Poker night, normally closed off to outsiders. That night they waved her in. Hesitated. She'd spent her whole career watching from the edges, comfortable in shadows, unnoticed. She thought about saying no, about retreating to her usual place in the equipment room with the rifle. But then's voice whispered through memory again. Sometimes you have to let them see you, Soph, not the rifle, you. So she sat. The cards felt awkward in her hands at first, the men's laughter louder than she remembered, the jokes crude but harmless. She didn't laugh much. But when Martinez groaned at her winning hand, she allowed the smallest smile to slip through. And they noticed. Respect in their world wasn't handed out in speeches. It was measured in inclusion. A seat at the table, a nod in the field, a voice in the planning session. Felt it slowly, like dawn breaking, a warmth she hadn't expected. The invisible wall that had stood between her and them since the first deployment began to crumble. But warmth brought unease. Because with respect came recognition, and with recognition came expectation. She still carried words carved into the M24's stock, one shot, one soul. But she also carried another truth she could not miss now, not ever, not after what they'd seen. One mistake and she'd fall from respect back into the shadows of doubt. Late at night, when the base quieted, she sat in the equipment room with the rifle laid across the table. Her hands moved through the ritual cleaning, bolt, chamber, scope, barrel. Every click, every swipe of the cloth, every inspection of the glass was both maintenance and meditation. The SEALs passed by sometimes, heading to bunks or showers. Before they would ignored her. Now they paused, sometimes stepping inside. You really don't sleep, do you? Johnson asked one night, his shoulder still bandaged but his grin crooked. Sleep when the rifle's clean, murmured, eyes on the chamber. He chuckled. That thing's cleaner than Martinez's teeth. She looked up at him then, the corners of her mouth twitching despite herself. Small moments, fleeting, but new. The missions kept coming. Recon runs, Overwatch. Patrols through villages where children stared with wide eyes and old men watched with suspicion. And each time the team leader's briefing was different. You're not just comms, you're our overwatch. A shift small in words, huge in meaning. Didn't celebrate, she didn't want to, but she felt it, a knot in her chest loosening just slightly. On one mission, they positioned her on a ridge overlooking a valley. She lay prone for hours, scope trained on the winding road below while the SEALs moved through the village. She heard their voices over comms, calm, professional. They trusted her eyes, trusted her to see what they couldn't. And when movement stirred at the edge of the valley, when shadows shifted against the sand, she called it out. 3 contacts, East Ridge, bearing 095. Seconds later, the SEALs adjusted, their angles clean, their weapons ready. A potential ambush dissolved before it began. They didn't see her nod into the dirt, whispering to the rifle, "Good eye, you taught me well." But they felt her presence, even from afar. Respect grew, but discomfort grew with it. She wasn't used to voices calling her name in the mess hall. She wasn't used to being asked her opinion during planning. She wasn't used to men twice her size glancing at her rifle with reverence instead of skepticism. She wasn't used to belonging. And belonging frightened her more than isolation ever had. Because to belong meant to risk being seen, and to be seen meant to risk disappointing. One evening, after another poker game where she quietly took more chips than she lost, Martinez leaned back in his chair, studying her with narrowed eyes. "You know, you scare me more than the enemy." Blinked. "Why?" "Because you don't talk much, and the quiet ones, they're the ones who change the game." He sipped from his canteen, then added with a grin, "And you already proved that once." The men chuckled, but the weight behind his words settled on her shoulders. She excused herself early, slipping back to the equipment room. She sat with the rifle again, fingers tracing the scratched stock. A new notch had been carved there. Her 18th. A series that stretched back across deployments, across continents, across lives taken in silence. 18 souls. She whispered it like a confession. 18. Her brother's face flashed in memory, smiling, teasing, steadying her hands on a rifle too big for her. Courage isn't about emptying a magazine, soft. It's about holding steady for the one shot that changes everything. She pressed her forehead to the cool steel of the barrel, eyes closed. She wanted to believe that courage still guided her. But sometimes, in the quiet, it felt less like courage and more like survival. Less like belonging and more like pretending. Outside, the base buzzed with the life of soldiers. Inside, she was still what she had always been. A shadow with glass, a guardian unseen until she had to act. And though the SEALs now called her their sniper, though the base whispered her story with awe, held on to the truth had left her. Respect is earned in silence, and silence is what she would return to until the next impossible night called her to break it. What happens when the thing that finally earns you respect is the very thing that eats away at your soul? The desert was quiet again, too quiet, but this time wasn't at the back of the column, doubted and dismissed. This time she was placed high on a ridge, her M24 dug into the earth, bipod legs locked, scope sweeping over the valley below. The SEAL team had shifted their language in subtle ways. No longer Talon Charlie. Now it was Overwatch. She heard it in the team leader's voice before they left the wire, the tone crisp, professional, not dismissive anymore. "You've got the glass, Shadow 24. If we miss something, you don't." Gave her usual quiet nod. She never asked for more. But as she lay in the dirt, the rifle warm against her cheek, she felt the difference. Their lives now leaned on her in ways they hadn't before. And that weight pressed harder than the rifle ever had. Through the scope, the village looked almost peaceful. Mud walls, a few goats tied to posts, the faint smoke of cooking fires curling into the air. Children darted between alleys, their laughter carried on the breeze, but knew better. She had learned to look past the surface. The quiet wasn't peace, it was waiting. Her scope swept to the ridge opposite. Shadows shifted in the rocks, too controlled to be civilians. She steadied her breath. "Contacts," she whispered into comms. "North Ridge, 6 men, weapons visible." "Copy that, good eyes." The team leader's voice carried no hesitation now. The SEALs in the valley adjusted instantly, angles clean, movements fluid. The fight that could have been a surprise never even began. The 6 figures melted back into the rocks, realizing their cover had failed. Exhaled, cheek still pressed to the stock. Just a warning, no trigger this time. But her finger twitched anyway. Because every time she looked through glass, every time she steadied her breathing, every time she felt the trigger beneath her skin, memory returned. Voice. The etched words, one shot, one soul. She whispered it like a mantra, like a curse. Her radio crackled again. "East side, do you see it?" She swung her scope. Another figure, this one crouched behind a low wall, an RPG balanced on his shoulder, aimed at her team. Her heartbeat slowed, time stretched. Breath, sight picture, trigger squeeze. The M24 thundered. The man collapsed, weapon clattering against the wall. The team below never even flinched. They trusted her. Trusted that when she spoke, when she fired, it meant survival. But's chest ached. She rolled her finger against the stock, her throat tight. Another soul, another notch she would carve tonight. When the mission ended, the team exfiltrated without injury. A clean operation, a victory. Back at base, Martinez slapped her shoulder lightly. "You saved my ass out there. Owe you a drink." She gave him a small smile she didn't feel, because she didn't want a drink, didn't want the praise. She wanted silence. She wanted back. She wanted to not see the man with the RPG every time she closed her eyes. Later, in the equipment room, she carved another notch into the rifle's stock. 19 now. The sound of the blade scraping wood filled the small space. One shot, one soul. Her hands trembled after she finished, so she gripped the rifle until the shaking stopped. That night the SEALs invited her again. Poker, jokes, the kind of camaraderie she'd always been. She sat with them, cards in her hands, their voices swirling around her like music. For the first time, she almost felt part of it. But halfway through the game, Johnson leaned back and said, half joking, half serious, "I swear you see everything before it happens. Like you're not human sometimes." The men laughed, forced a small grin, but inside the words cut. Not human. That was the thing. To them, she was a sniper now, a professional, a miracle worker, but to herself she was just a woman who used to chase deer with her brother in the mountains, a woman who still carried the memory of her parents crying when coffin came home. The line between human and weapon blurred more with every shot. Later, lying on her cot, she couldn't sleep. She stared at the canvas ceiling, the desert wind rattling the tent. Her ears still echoed with the rifle's crack. Her mind replayed the man on the ridge, the RPG slipping from his lifeless arms. She thought of his laugh, his patience, the way he used to correct her grip, his hand firm but gentle on her shoulder. She whispered into the dark, "I don't know how many more, I don't know if I can keep counting." But the war didn't care. The next morning, another briefing, another mission, another set of coordinates on a map, and again. Overwatch. The words now carried no doubt, only expectation. She should have felt pride. Instead, she felt the walls closing in. Because every mission meant more notches. Every mission meant more souls she would carry. Every mission meant the line between respect and isolation grew thinner. And knew one truth too well: respect was heavy, heavier than her rifle, heavier than survival. She slung the M24 across her back anyway, because belonging, even if it cost her humanity, was something she couldn't walk away from now. Sometimes courage wasn't about a bullet. Sometimes courage was shouldering the weight of what came after. What happens when the shot you don't take matters more than the ones you do? The mission brief was simple on paper. Secure a suspected weapons cache in a crumbling village near the border, gather intel, exfiltrate before dawn. Simple never survived contact with reality. Knew it as soon as she spotted the map spread across the table. The valley was a funnel, steep ridges on both sides, only one road in and out. Perfect for trade, perfect for ambush. The team leader traced a finger along the route. Overwatch again. You'll set up here North Ridge, clear line of sight on the village. She nodded, quiet as always. The others didn't question it anymore. Overwatch wasn't an afterthought now, it was the first line of survival. That night she lay belly down on the ridge. The M24 settled into her shoulder, scope sweeping across the valley. The desert air was cold, biting, the kind of cold that found its way into your lungs and refused to leave. Below, the seals moved like shadows through the narrow road. Their figures were small from her vantage, silhouettes against the pale wash of moonlight. Her radio crackled softly, "Check east flank." She shifted her scope. Movement. A cluster of men crouched among rocks, rifles glinting faintly, not civilians, fighters, waiting. "East Ridge, 10 hostiles, concealed. Possible ambush," she whispered. "Copy that, adjusting position." The SEALs shifted instantly, sweeping their weapons toward the threat. The ambush was broken before it began. But her eyes caught something else. A boy, not much older than 15, crouched among the fighters, his hands shaking as he tried to steady the AK-47 in his grip. His lips moved like he was praying, or maybe whispering to himself. His body screamed of fear, not resolve. His finger hovered over the trigger, breath steady, crosshairs on his chest. One squeeze and he would never fire. She hesitated. His voice rose in memory, patience, precision, certainty. But what about mercy? Through her scope, she saw the boy glance at the older man beside him, waiting for a signal. His eyes weren't hard. They were terrified. Her chest tightened. The SEALs were depending on her. If she didn't fire, the boy could, and one round from his rifle could end a life below. Her finger twitched, then froze. She shifted her scope 2 degrees left, targeted the older man instead, breathed, fired. The man fell, chest exploding in dust and cloth. The boy jerked back, dropping his rifle, scrambling into the rocks, fleeing down the ridge like a frightened animal. The fight broke open. The remaining fighters fired blindly, their ambush shattered. The SEALs cut through them with discipline and speed. Within minutes, the ridge was silent again. "Good work," the team leader's voice crackled. "Ambush neutralized." But didn't answer. Her eye lingered on the empty space where the boy had crouched. The image burned into her mind. His face, his shaking hands, the way he ran when given the chance. She whispered into the cold night air, so soft only the rifle heard her. One shot, one soul, but not his. When they returned to base, the SEALs buzzed with quiet adrenaline. Another mission survived. Another victory pulled from the jaws of chaos. They patted her shoulder, nodded at her with gratitude, but carried something heavier. She sat in the equipment room later, blade pressed into the rifle's stock, carving another notch. 20 now. Her hand trembled as she cut. The wood whispered beneath the blade. 20, but it could have been 21. She set the blade down, pressing her palm against the stock, her forehead against the cool steel. His face came back again, his smile, his certainty, his belief that patience and precision defined a sniper. But tonight she had chosen something else, chosen to let a frightened boy live. And the question gnawed at her, was that mercy or was it weakness? The SEALs never asked. They didn't know about the boy. They only knew the ambush hadn't worked. To them, it was another professional job. To her, it was a fracture in the identity she carried. At poker that night, Martinez shoved a pile of chips toward her. "You're too damn steady. Cards, rifle, doesn't matter, always stone cold. She gave him a small smile, but inside she wanted to scream. Stone cold? No, she wasn't stone. She was fire and ash and breaking glass. Later, alone, she whispered into the dark, "I'm not stone, I'm still human, I have to be." The words felt like both a prayer and a warning, because she knew the war wouldn't always give her a choice. One day, hesitation might cost lives. One day, mercy might mean failure. But tonight, one boy still breathed, and that mattered to her in ways she couldn't explain to anyone else. Sometimes courage wasn't the shot you took. Sometimes it was the shot you didn't. What happens when hesitation itself becomes the enemy? The mission came without warning. Alarms broke the thin veil of sleep, and within minutes was strapping on her vest, slinging the M24 across her back. The team leader's briefing was quick, urgent. Convoy ambushed 6 clicks out. Hostiles pinning down friendlies. We move now. No maps, no long discussions. Just adrenaline, weapons, and the trust that training would carry them through. The night air was sharp as they rolled out, the convoy of armored trucks kicking dust into the desert sky. Sat in the back, her rifle across her knees, fingers tracing the grooves in the worn stock. 19 notches, 20, all carved in silence. Her chest felt heavy, not from the rifle this time, from the weight of knowing they expected her to see what they couldn't, to shoot what they couldn't reach. The firefight was already raging when they arrived. Tracer rounds carved red arcs across the valley. Burning vehicles lit the road like torches. The air trembled with the thud of machine guns and the crack of rifles. "High ground now," the leader barked. She didn't hesitate. She sprinted for a ridge, dirt spraying under her boots, lungs burning. She dropped to the ground, rifle dug in, scope raised. Through the glass, the battlefield unfolded in chaotic detail. Dozens of fighters on ridges, firing down into the pinned convoy. Friendlies trapped behind smoking wrecks, their movements desperate, their survival hanging by threads. Her scope found one enemy, then another. She breathed, squeezed. One fell, then another. The rhythm returned, breath, squeeze, bolt, a deadly metronome. But then she saw him. Not a boy this time. A man, older, weathered, crouched behind cover with binoculars pressed to his face. Not firing, not even carrying a rifle, but directing. His hand rose, signaling fighters to shift positions, to focus fire where the convoy's defenses were weakest. He wasn't pulling the trigger, but he was the reason others were. Steadied her crosshairs on his chest, breath, squeeze. But her finger froze, because she saw something familiar in his face. Not cruelty, not rage, just exhaustion, the weariness of someone who had carried too much for too long. He reminded her of the way he used to rub his eyes when the weight of responsibility pressed too heavy. Her pulse quickened. She heard his voice in her head again. Sometimes the right shot changes everything. But what if the right shot wasn't a shot at all? She hesitated, long enough for the man to duck, vanish into smoke. "What the hell are you doing?" the leader's voice barked over comms. "We need that spotter down." Her cheeks burned. Her breath stuttered. She chambered another round, scanning, but the man was gone. The firefight raged on. The SEALs advanced, but harder now. Without that shot, the enemy held stronger, their fire coordinated, brutal, tried to make up for it. One enemy here, another there. But the knot in her chest only grew. She had hesitated, and her team knew it. By the time the last shots faded and the valley fell silent, 2 friendlies lay dead. 3 more were wounded, dragged bleeding into the dust. The SEALs regrouped among burning wrecks, their faces grim, their voices flat. They didn't look at her right away. Martinez finally broke the silence. "You had him, I saw it. Why didn't you take the shot?" His mouth was dry. She wanted to say the words, "Because he looked tired, because he reminded me of, because I'm still human, damn it." But she said nothing. She just lowered her eyes, fingers tight on the rifle's stock. The team leader's voice was clipped cold. "You don't hesitate, not out here, not when lives depend on it." She nodded once, but inside something cracked. Back at base, the silence around her was heavier than the noise of battle. No poker that night. No jokes. No nods of inclusion, just a distance she knew too well. She sat in the equipment room, carving a notch into the rifle's stock. 21. But this one felt different, not a soul taken, a reminder of the ones lost because she didn't. Her hands shook as she carved. She whispered into the wood. "I saw in his face and I froze. I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry." The rifle gleamed in the dim light, silent, unjudging. But the silence was worse than judgment. She pressed her forehead against the stock, tears she hadn't allowed in years burning hot against her cheeks. Respect had been hard to earn, but trust could be broken in a single breath. And she knew the truth. Shadows weren't supposed to hesitate. Shadows weren't supposed to feel. But she did, and now the question haunted her. Could she still be both, human and sniper, sister and soldier? Or would one destroy the other before this war was done? What do you do when the world no longer forgives hesitation? Knew the shift the moment she walked into the planning room. The SEALs were there, rifles stripped, gear laid out, their conversation sharp but subdued. Nobody mocked her anymore. Nobody dismissed her, but nobody invited her in either. The team leader's eyes lingered on her when he said, "Overwatch again." No hesitation this time. The words weren't cruel. They were colder than cruelty. They were a test. She nodded once, shouldered the M24 and said nothing. That night the mission carried them into the edge of a ruined city. The streets were hollow, windows gaping like empty eyes, shadows stretching long under the pale moonlight. The smell of smoke and rot clung to the air. Climbed a broken stairwell, boots silent on shattered concrete, until she reached the top of a half-collapsed building. From there, her scope stretched over the battlefield, alleys, rooftops, the kill zones where the enemy would come. Her heart was heavy, 21 notches in her rifle stock, one hesitation that cost lives. She carried both like weights chained to her chest. Below, the SEALs moved in formation, silent, precise. She watched them as much as she watched the streets, her scope sliding from rooftop to alley to window. Movement. Her breath stilled. An enemy fighter leaned from a window, RPG in his hands. She fired without thought, the round cutting him down before the weapon left his shoulder. Her radio crackled instantly. "Nice shot, keep it up." She swallowed hard, not because of the praise, because of the speed. She hadn't hesitated, she hadn't even breathed. Her scope swung again, another fighter, then another. Each fell in rhythm to her shots, the M24 booming, the bolt sliding smooth. Her team below advanced steadily, their confidence in her unspoken but absolute. But then she saw her test. A figure emerged in the street ahead of the SEALs, not armed, not aiming, just standing. A woman, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, eyes wide. Civilian, innocent. But the enemy had placed her there, realized. A shield, a pause button, a trap. Behind her, shadows shifted. Fighters crouching, rifles ready, waiting for the SEALs to step into the open. His finger hovered on the trigger. She could drop the fighters, but the woman stood directly in line with her shot. One pull, and she risked killing the very person they had sworn to protect. Her chest tightened. Not again, not another hesitation. Her pulse thundered, her throat dried. His voice rose in memory, firm but calm. "Soft, courage isn't about pulling the trigger fast. It's about knowing when to wait, and waiting anyway." Her breath slowed. She shifted her aim. The fighters moved, adjusting to fire. She exhaled, held steady, and found the narrow gap between the woman and the shadow behind her. One squeeze. The round cut clean, dropping the fighter without touching the woman. Another shift, another squeeze. 2 down, 3. The woman flinched, then bolted into an alley safe. The fighters scattered under her fire, their ambush collapsing before it began. Chambered another round, scanning. The SEALs surged forward, clearing the street, momentum theirs again. Her radio crackled with the team leader's voice. Not cold this time, not clipped, just steady. That's it, that's the work. For the first time since the night of the 91, she let herself breathe. Not because she had proven herself flawless, but because she had proven herself human, steady, deliberate, unbroken by fear. When the mission ended and the city fell quiet, the SEALs regrouped. Faces streaked with dust and sweat, eyes tired but alive. This time when they looked at her, it wasn't disbelief. It wasn't awe. It wasn't the brittle respect of men who had seen a miracle. It was something deeper. Trust. Back at base, Martinez dropped into the chair beside her during poker night, tossing chips into the pot. "You know, I finally figured it out," he said. Arched a brow. "Figured what out?" "You're not stone cold, you're steady. There's a difference, and I'll take steady over stone any day." The others nodded, unspoken agreement shared around the table. Lowered her eyes, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. She didn't need more than that. Inclusion had never been about words. It was about being there when it mattered. Later, alone in the equipment room, she cleaned the M24 one last time before racking it. Her hands moved slow, deliberate, as she traced the notch carved into the stock. 22 now. But beside them all was the faint, almost invisible engraving had left years ago. One shot, one soul. She whispered softly, "Not every soul has to be taken, some can be spared. And that matters too." The rifle gleamed in the dim light, reflecting her face, tired but steady. Outside, the war rumbled on. Missions would come, nights would break, and shadows would always be needed. But inside had found her balance. She wasn't stone. She wasn't legend. She wasn't a ghost. She was a shadow that chose when to reveal itself. Human, steady, silent until the moment she had to speak. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.